Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome everyone to all those who've joined us on Zoom and inshallah who will be watching this video later. We will start with the recitation from the Holy Quran, and then I'll introduce our guest speaker and carry on with the topic for today, which is related to economics. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So once again, thank you everyone who've joined us. We are really thankful to Brother Shabih Ali Mohib, who've joined us for this new seminar topic related to economics. This seminar has been arranged by Arbaeen Global Network. And just before we begin, I'd like to introduce Arbaeen Global Network, or AGN, to our viewers. Arbaeen Global Network, or AGN, was formed a few years ago by a group of brothers based in Europe and the UK. And the idea was to create a platform where we can have our participants share ideas, whether they are in their individual capacity or as an organization. And this came about by all of us visiting Karbala every year on the occasion of Arbaeen. And we thought that it's not wise to just leave this as a one-off occasion where people just come in and pay their respects to the holy imams and then go back to their sort of lives. This would be an all year round thing, and that's where AGN was formed. And we've been having conferences inside the shrine of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and also created a website called arba'inglobal.net, which is an online platform for sharing projects and ideas and connecting individuals and organizations globally. So part of that initiative to carry on with the work and keep the energy alive during the year as well, between two Arbaeens essentially, we've got a monthly seminar series, and we invite experts from different fields to join us online from whichever country they're from, and discuss on their topic of expertise for the benefits of our audiences again, and in a global sort of perspective. And later on, there is a chance for you to connect to our respective speaker on the platform if you have any further questions, or if you like to connect or gain from their valuable experiences. So we've got Brother Shabih today. Thank you very much, Brother Shabih, again for joining us. And today's the topic is economy today, and it's such a vast and interesting topic that we couldn't like summarize it. So it's a bit of a broad sort of description in the topic. But inshallah, we'll be going through some questions that would hopefully explain about the topic more. So I thought just to ask Brother Shabih in the beginning as well, for clarification for lots of our viewers, including myself as well, is to just explain what is the role of an economist in the economy of today, and from that we'll lead on to the more sort of deeper questions. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Brother Shabih, inshallah. If you can start off with just explaining the role of your role, basically what you do in your day-to-day life, and inshallah we'll carry on. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Ali, and thanks also to the Arbaeen networking group for inviting me. It was also a pleasure to meet some of the members in Karbala on Arbaeen. So, what I'll do is I'll essentially present over the next 15 minutes just a short conversation starter on the economy of today. And I'll kick it off with your question, what is the role of the economist? And I think one of the key roles is to solve problems. And what we do is we try to solve problems subject to the constraints, subject to data, and also being sort of critical evaluation is something that is how economists are trained. So what we try to do is we look at trends, we look at the past, we look at the present, we then try to forecast some of the future, which relates to the economy, and then try to sort of think through what is, what would improve growth, what would improve prospects for equity and equality. So that's what the focus is very much, and how the economist is generally trained.
Okay, just a follow on that, because there's obviously economists of different levels as well. There probably be like some sort of people who are just entering into the profession. Some of them would be like sort of more experienced, like yourselves as well. So how does this role like get into more depth over time? It is, I appreciate, like it must be a very complex thing, and you need to have quite a lot of insight and experience to be able to advise and even see things in a particular way. So how does that journey sort of progresses over time?
So, training in economics kind of equips you with certain tools about sort of, forecasting, etc. And over time, you gain the experience of sort of like, how systems work, how countries work, the issues. And also as time goes, you tend to accumulate a lot of knowledge. And that allows you to essentially sharpen your analysis over time. And in the meantime, there's also the change in political economy, because one of the things that economics is all about is how rational agents behave, and that's how you model things. But we see a lot of irrationality in the world, where you can't actually explain why people act in a certain way. So the best economist is one who can actually think through, what is a better sort of way forward, subject to the political economy, subject to irrationality, and subject to all the uncertainties that are out there. Because that's where, over time, you get the ability to fine tune your toolbox.
Okay, I think that explains it quite well. It's almost like using data from the past to predict the future. So you constantly like just thinking what is about to come based on your analysis. So seems to like very complex for me, but inshallah, like you know what you're doing. The word global economy is becoming like very common these days, and that sort of highlights that there's obviously the local aspect of the economy, the part of the world where you lives in. It could be even at a city level, or or at a country level, and then that country becomes part of the global systems, and you see lots of parts of the world as well, which different sort of economies sort of growing in the world. So there's local, there is the world economy, and then there's this thing global as well, because within the world you can have like different economies too. So in for the benefits of our sort of viewers, what are we meant to know in terms of what's happening locally around us? How does this connect to the countries and then the whole like global economic system?
Thanks, Ali. Everybody must have read about this whole, the global village. And in a way, those are two sort of very different words put together. And essentially, technology, along with connectivity, has essentially warped space and time. So you and I are talking right now, and we could actually have our avatars, and that just means you're in London, I'm in Bangkok, and we're having a conversation. So time and space has collapsed. Now, with regards to the way technology has come in, you also have a lot of sort of globalization was all about supply chains. You essentially produce a car, and you essentially get the engine from Japan, you get some local stuff from here and there, and you put it together. So it was very assembly type stuff. And now, as the world is moving towards much more innovation, much more sort of like, services, etc., the concept of globalization has come in. So essentially, countries would like to be global players, but they also would like to localize a lot of innovation, a lot of the value added that's out there. And essentially, what you see about value added is skills, right? Because it's very easy to slap things together, give me an air conditioner, I'll get five people to manufacture it and send it across. But it's very difficult to program an AI algorithm, right? So that's where essentially you also see the payment, the salaries, which are very different for these two tasks. So there we see, and I see a lot of localization where communities and countries would like to be global players. They're distributed but connected from technology, and therefore ideas are flowing very easily, goods are flowing very easily. And that's where I think the whole concept of space and time has essentially warped in many ways, because you get on a plane and be in any situation in about 10-12 hours kind of thing. So the world has really shrunk in this space. Over.
And as I was mentioning about the word like global economy, so is there such thing as a global economy, or is it more that every country would have its own economy? And when we say global, what are we actually comparing between two countries or global economy?
So when you look at the global economy, it's just an aggregate of all gross domestic products. So when you essentially add up all the gross domestic products of countries, they add up to the global GDP. That's what they call it. And then they start sort of like, dividing it about which countries essentially contribute to it. So there are regions where you can actually read a lot of articles in magazines, The Economist, etc., which says the Eurozone has got such and such GDP, North America has got such and such GDP. You got blocks like ASEAN out here in Southeast Asia, which has its own sort of like GDP. So when people talk about the global GDP, people talk about global sort of like goods and services produced. But one of the things that people talk very less about is global debt. Did you know that the global debt is essentially going up around 330 trillion or the like, which is essentially, I believe, three times the GDP? Let me consult my presentation and not give you, you know, um, yeah, so the global debt is $313 trillion, which is equal to 330% of global GDP. So people people don't talk about that aspect. But that's what, global GDP is. And you can break it down to country, you can break it down to region, you can break it down to province. So Sindh will have a different GDP, Punjab will have a different GDP. When you add up the provinces, they get to the national GDP.
And is there some involvement? I'm sure there must be some of it, but is there some involvement of competition and power between economies, like trying to dominate over each other, or they're kind of more dependent on each other to work together? Or one economy can dominate as well.
So,
Like we talked about, whether we talk about Chinese economies and, as I said, like American sort of thing and Euro sort of economies, but are they all sort of working together with their own sort of special sort of areas, or one of them is trying to dominate over the other, and they become more dependent on the others?
So, there's interdependence in the entire global system, right? So you can't actually say that one country can be kind of delinked with another. So if you take, for example, Australia, right? So Australia is mining a lot of oil, of coal, right? And shipping a lot of it to China, and China is using it to manufacture stuff, and then just tend to ship it across the world, right? And so in many ways, if you essentially say, I'm going to take China out of the equation, then you also have to take the demand for coal out of the equation. I'm just simplifying. It could be anything. Now, if you take any you're wearing a very nice black shirt, it seems to be, or something. When you look at where the fabric came from, sort of where the printing happened, where the zippers and all of that were done, you'll essentially realize that it's probably more than 10 countries which have essentially contributed to putting together this. So it's a lot of interdependence in this space, rather than being islands of economies which are very independent and not connected.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think that explains it sort of quite well. My next question is going a little bit down in the level, more towards like communities, and we see that economies is discussed as we were just talking about cities and countries and at a global level, but we have now big communities which are in effect like their own like big groups of people spread across the world as well. And although they're utilizing their sort of local economies, but themselves, they've developed habits and traits that how the economy operates. And the classic example is the Shia Muslim community, where we say that every year when we have this event of Arbaeen, for example, a huge influx of sort of visitors coming in from different parts of the world. So it affects the airlines, it affects the local country where this is happening. And we have like other communities as well, whether it's like a religious community, or is it's a community that's come together based on certain sort of common interesting. So do you think like communities can influence their the city or the country level sort of economy as well, based on their spending habits or based on their sort of practices?
Yeah, so that's a golden question, and one where the answer is a definite yes. Because when you look at communities, and when you look at influences and influencers, and how you are influenced and how you influence others, so it starts with then the family, the broader sort of friends group, then you get into the community group and the like. And I think, like, for me, the most important sort of essay I've ever read on governance is the letter that Imam Ali wrote to Malik Ashtar, right? So how to govern. And a lot of what Imam Ali writes in, or the or Najul Balagha has, is actually what we should practice. Because in a way, you have meritocracy, you essentially have, how you should actually, when you go to a country, how you should sort of like interact with locals, how you should interact with yourself, how you should spend money and the like. So based on the event itself, one could bring together a lot of the networking that you have already started. But then when you look at communities, and you look at investment in human capital, I think it's very important to think through avenues of scholarships, needs based. There are incredibly talented people who are out there who are essentially looking for great universities, but they can't afford it from the communities. One should have a scholarship program. There's also a lot of benefits in apprenticeships and mentoring. So, for example, if you got certain services, and I think when I was in Karbala, one panelist was talking about the fact that when you look at all the human capital that comes into Karbala that day, you've got, engineers, you've got doctors, you've got economists, you've got mathematicians, you've got such a lot of talent. So spend some time and sort of, creating communities of practice, or create or imparting that knowledge, solid waste management and all of that stuff. So I think there is a lot to be done, but I think it all starts with the accumulation of human capital, and for us to essentially govern ourselves the way Imam Ali has suggested we should. And then if you're successful, you'll also have a community that's highly successful. And throughout my 20 plus years, 25 plus years of development experience, what I've noticed is where you bring in merit, where you bring in talent, and you don't do the kind of like nepotism that you see around the world. You shine, the communities shine, and everybody else shines. And we should adopt that, and we should essentially also be that. So that would be my takeaway.
So I think the first thing that my mind goes towards is when communities do plan their sort of practices or events or any other sort of work. The focus is obviously on buying lots of goods and services, and they would look for the best possible sort of options in there. Do you think like they can? I know the answer probably be yeah, but do you think they can benefit from getting advice from an economist and something like Arbaeen, if they had a panel, or maybe they already have it, but if they have a panel of economists, considering like what they can offer, could this be become beneficial for the country, and could it be like more useful, or it won't at that level the economist won't be able to make much of a difference. So you're on mute, Shabir.
Thank you. So Ali,
Okay.
the answer is yes, and I think the answer is about taking forward conversations and taking them to the 3 feet level. So, for example, if you think through the key issues that, for example, the community or the country or a locality, whatever, could be thinking through, the role of the economist is to think through solutions. And what I've seen is that finding solutions is relatively straightforward. But then implementing them is what essentially takes courage, mettle, and dedication. And that's where I think we should continue to follow through. So essentially, if you give me a specific example, then one could be very specific about it. But what I've seen is that oftentimes we have fantastic conversations, and then one takes it through. So, for example, on the economy, if you're looking at how one should invest, what are the trends to look out for, what are the things to watch out for, how do you essentially sort of pivot yourself in view of what you see the global economy is getting towards. So those kind of advice is incredibly good. And then the question is about implementing it. And that's where I think being able to take an idea to the 3 feet level actually helps in that space. And we can, because we've got as a community, we've got all the different sort of players, it seems, if you take the simile of football team, right? You've got the entire construction crew also. So we can build something big.
And I think most of the communities, they at least as far as I know, like they all have a great emphasis on welfare of their like sort of lesser sort of advantage community members, and a lot of money is raised by charities and then spent on the welfare of their own sort of community members. And do you think like that's a place where if it's thought through in a proper way, then communities obviously they are spread around the world, and we've got some examples of organizations as well, which are now sort of global organizations who are helping like their particular communities. But I'm just wondering, and maybe like someone listening to this could have this idea of approaching an economist, that all the welfare money that they collect through fundraising or people donating their share of it, if we have an economist like looking at x million of pounds sort of coming in, and without thinking being spent or being thought about and being spent, like how would an economist like benefit the welfare system, if any? Because there's huge amounts of money being raised and spent in that welfare side for each community.
So no, Ali, I think welfare is important, and for those that are that need welfare, I think that's very important, right? But I think the real game changer is education, right? Because then that returns provides returns in quantums, right? So if you balance it out and you essentially say there are certain people who are needy in the community, certain people who need social protection or welfare, then one should do it over time. But then I do think that one should essentially also help on education, skills, apprenticeships, mentoring, because those are sort of skills that are lifelong, and they change lives and families. So I think with regard to the amount of resources being raised, um, I'm not saying welfare is you should do less on welfare, but I think one should do more on education and more on sort of like getting the, instead of giving fish, give the, yeah.
You train the person how to fish basically. Yeah, that's an excellent example as well. Yeah, so I think there's I certainly come across lots of these discussions where people talk about the money remaining within the community and the businesses should support each other. But that I feel like that sort of still remains at an idea level because at some point you do want some sort of a service, but then you either don't find it in the community or you don't have them at that level where you want to buy it, and some other communities are more advanced than that. So I think this is where your education point really is valuable, because if you can take your services to the high quality level, then not only you can benefit your own communities, but bring the revenue in to that sort of community as well. So definitely I think education never goes sort of in vain. It has some sort of but is it easy to study and become an economist, or is it something like because you don't normally see a lot of economists, and I'm just wondering, like, is that something very specialist? You probably have like more doctors than economists, which seems to be like a more harder sort of study route to take in. Is that what you experienced too, or?
So I'll just come back to your point about keeping the flow within the community. I'm not a big fan of a protected kind of ecosystem, because and you can see that in countries, right? So a lot of countries say, look, I'm gonna use my community, let me call the country, and I'm going to do import substitution. I'm going to do everything myself, right? Or with the community. None of that ever thrives. You only thrive when you compete. And therefore, with regards to the services that are needed, the resources that one has, one should get the best for the community. And if at all it's similar to somebody who's not in the community, then fine. But I think that's how learning happens. When you essentially bring in the best ideas and you take them and then you implement them, you learn a lot. So if you were to essentially not do that, then you'll stay within a certain confine, and you're only going to get to the max in that, and it oftentimes makes one a bit lazy. And I mean, I can give you many examples from the economics field. You take Vietnam and you take, another country. Vietnam essentially just went for competition globally. And some other countries decided to keep their borders closed and just import what they need to produce stuff. And over the last 30, 40 years, countries have done very differently. And Vietnam is just uh, uh, quadrupled its income levels and the like. Now, your question about being an economist or not, I think if you have an inquisitive mind, and if you're sort of like, somebody who wants to explore where the data leads you, and think through alternate sort of like conclusions, I think it's the economics field is a very good one, because in a way, there isn't a scientific yes or no, but it's much more of like a discovery of what is, better than the current state. Um, so yeah, no, I mean, different people, different strokes.
Okay, so that just leans on to this like natural question. I mean, it seems like the economists can provide like really beneficial advice, and at every scale as well. So I guess like we should be inspiring our youth to sort of look into this subject more and more, and some of them, can then follow on to become like good. But what's the attraction for them? Like, how do we inspire our youth towards this field of study, and then the practice as well later on? As in, what has been your achievements, like some stuff to inspire the others?
So I think when you look at mega trends and when you look at where we are, so you got essentially Internet of Things, right? You got connected devices, you got quantum computing, you got AI, deep machine learning, and you got robotics, right? When you add them up and you then think through what kind of jobs will remain and what kind of jobs will sunset, you will find that jobs that have got essentially very sort of mechanical input output stuff will be done by machines. Yeah. And there's a lot of research that tells you that's already happening in the economy of today. So what you need to have is develop critical thinking, right? So the STEAM skills, right? Science, technology, engineering, economics, mathematician, is where you essentially have that sort of game, right? So essentially, what is useful is, you see, a lot of people think that Chat GPT will take over the world, and Hollywood always portrays AI as the next thing that ends the world kind of thing, right? So, but and there are lots of people who say that singularity will be achieved in the next 10 years, and singularity is where AI goes into generative mode, and then it starts generating and regenerating, and then essentially it sort of like has a mind of its own in many ways, right? I don't think that's going to happen, right? But what will happen is that you'll have big data, you'll have huge amounts of computing skills, and you'll have problems to solve, because, as you know, climate change is a big one, right? And so how do you solve those issues? Being trained as in the STEAM skills is hugely important, which is where I think economics comes in as a discipline that's able to essentially think about the rationality and the data and all of that put together, but then it's also able to bring together human sort of like aspirations, inspirations, and all, and to gel them together and think through, so what's next, right? And that's where I think there is a real I think this is a field that will grow. And if you're essentially wanting to go into a growing field where you challenge your mind and keep learning, this is where you'll find a lot of it.
Okay, I was thinking of bring a way to bring AI into this into this conversation, because I'm like an AI sort of professional as well, and what I'm not directly related to economics, but the usual discussions around the future of AI is that at every level it will be able to present you options, but humans ultimately would need to decide if they want to choose the best option. It may recommend something, but the decision that a human makes, won't be compared to sort of AI. So, is that what we are sort of anticipating as a future of AI in economics? Then it can do all the modeling for you based on all the data, but the end result needs to be sort of verified and almost like given the go ahead by a human, rather than AI suggesting something.
So the current sort of AI model that we have, if you give it a development problem and you ask for a development solution, it actually doesn't get there, right? It essentially doesn't, so it's not able to solve a problem to, let's say, how do you solve a revenue morale problem, right? So for example, a country I work on collects around 10% of GDP in revenues, right? and you can do whatever you want to do to tax policy. People just don't pay. Right? So when you ask AI what will get the revenue take to come up and what will improve the tax morale, it essentially goes blank. It gives you generalities from, economics, not 101, but maybe 401, right? You have to then think through what motivates people, and AI is not able to do that, right? So AI is still not able to be your psychologist. It still cannot be your nurse. It can't provide anything that requires empathy and anything that requires, I think, irrational modeling. It does everything in some sort of like like a algorithm, but it's very difficult to run an irrational moral algorithm with the technology that one has. So that's my take. And by the way, if you look at the movies of 1980s, right, and then you fast forward them to where they were predicting you to be in 2020, you'd be flying with jetpacks, but you're not. So AI is, I think, similarly selling snake oil in many ways, right? And that's how I see it. We've tried it. We've got a lot of people developing AI uses. I'm trying to get my team to also think through macro modeling using AI tools and all of that, but it just hasn't yet happened.
I'm just thinking like, yeah, I think what we're shown in 2050 world now, which we're very excited about, it's just the past performance of what we were told like 30 years ago. That didn't happen, then the chances are then it would still be sort of fiction until that point. Some of it would develop, but largely it would sort of remain as fiction. Okay, so I think it feels like there is quite a lot of complexities involved in an economist's sort of role in predicting and using sort of data. And there must be a lot of sort of risks and challenges around this. Risk being like that you would know that this could go wrong, and then you'll have your own sort of measures ensuring that as far as possible you can keep like sort of people safe. But then if you have thought about a certain way that this is how things will behave and it doesn't, then we have like lots of impact, and these impacts would be like sort of big impacts as well. I know the UK economy, especially like it's for the last like 4 or 5 years it's been really, really sort of unstable, and it down to like it's affecting people's lives. So what where we are is where we are, but we don't know like in 6 months time, for example, like what petrol prices would be like, or what house prices would be like, or even how much of foreign aid, for example, like we will be able to afford. This is the UK's example. So if whatever you predict like doesn't happen, how do you there's quite a lot of risk management. So even risk management is a risk itself as well, it seems like, or a challenge. So what are these like few things like or crucial stuff for the next, I'd say, like 3 to 5 years that you see happening, and what should people be doing like to keep themselves safe?
So no, I think that's again one a golden question that many countries are thinking through, especially after COVID, because debt has gone up and people have spent a lot of their savings and the like. So I think one important thing that we do, and I do, and I also recommend is to have a conservatism bias. So sometimes people have an optimism bias whereby they essentially sort of to say that the future will be like, the economy will grow by 5%, 7%, and it's just an optimistic view. So what I tend to do is have a view where you're able to be surprised on the upside and build buffers and build resilience. So those will be my two things, right? So for example, be very careful with taking on debt, and especially taking it on sort of like no, floating basis, because what you see in the world around you is uncertainty, right? You've got essentially peace and war, you've got climate change and not, You then have demographic shifts, and you essentially got a lot of technological shifts. So whenever these changes are happening, I think it's good to be conservative and increase saving rates. So essentially, I would say, the whole question of materialism and the fact that you go and get everything debt financed, that's actually a bad thing. So I think being more fiscally conservative for an individual as well as a country is helpful. And for countries that have debt, they should retire expensive debt and essentially free up sort of space for more private investment. So that would be the take, because you're right. I mean, it's very difficult to predict petrol prices, very difficult to predict sort of how the economy will grow, how the world will be. So therefore, one should prepare for the worst and be surprised for the better.
Okay, just I think a related question is when you talk about debt, we have some of these international institutions, the likes of International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and I don't know, some other like United Nations sort of related things, and they're meant to sort of help countries like who have who maybe like gone into some issues by either not predicting sort of well or their predictions sort of going wrong. This model of the world sort of saving sort of different countries, at the face of it, it feels like quite a good sort of deal that if you have a problem, then you can borrow from a central institution and then everything would be fine. But there must be something like for these countries to think about, and we see some of our like sort of Asian countries very dependent on these sort of loans and it then goes down to like every citizen of that country like comes in debt and then governments change. So these big sort of institutions which are meant to save countries, if you can just briefly like what is their model and is this really like helping countries or are they becoming like more richer and who is ultimately benefiting?
Yeah, so the institutions, the IFIs, are there to essentially support growth and support countries in equity related issues. The IMF is there to essentially provide temporary support when you have an external problem where essentially you're hit by a shock and you got a balance of payments problem. While the World Bank and the ADB and all these multilateral development banks, they're much more focused about improving growth prospects. So when you then look at countries which essentially have been experiencing these recurrent sort of like crises and recurrent sort of like access to these IFIs, you will essentially see that domestic policy is the issue, right? Because a country is an amalgam of households, right? And the question is, households should essentially manage their books, right? So you got your salary, you got your income, your net income, and your expenditure somehow, sometime are positive and negative. Then you take on certain debt or not, and then you know that your income will grow by a certain amount, and you will be able to carry it forward. Unfortunately, when you are you're able to do that well. But when you become a public official, then essentially the public concept sort of changes, and countries don't tend to collect as much, right? A lot of countries run state-owned enterprises which are loss-making, right? And they're not even providing proper services. Now, if you are an individual, you would not do that, right? But you are an individual running a public sector company, and you're doing that, right? So when you look at Latin America, when you look at Asia, when you look at Africa, when you look at the West, you have a lot of issues in Europe too, where debt is very high, the economies are not growing, and the question is where will jobs come from? So it's a global phenomenon. It all comes back to effectively governing your public finances, right? And again, now it goes back straight to that letter that Imam Ali wrote, right? There isn't been any innovation in governance of an economy since that letter, right? Yet people don't implement it. So there are various takes to it as to why not. There's state capture, there's elite capture, there's corruption, and all of that stuff. But at the end of it, international organizations are not able to save countries, right? Countries save themselves, and countries save themselves through domestic policy. And if you're based in the UK, you already have ideas of what the country should do to get out of whatever the questions it has, and then you ponder why doesn't it happen, and you, I'm sure, have a lot of answers for that too. And that's the key of why countries don't move ahead. And it's always easy to blame an outsider, right? It's always easy to say, look, because of X, I'm in this situation. But when you look at yourself and you're saying that, would I do this if I was a household and I was if I was a representative of the country, would I do this to myself? And depending on your answer, you'll find your solution.
That's what my CFO always says that think of it as your own money and then you'll make the wisest decision. If you think it's like someone else's money, then it's very different. So it's very true. Like I think the truth is in the self-assessment side of things. There's also this phenomenon about some of these large companies, the likes of I don't know, tech companies, Microsoft and Google and some news organizations and all those other things, and they kind of influence the world economies as well, because they have accumulated so much wealth that sometimes an organization can be wealthier than the state itself. Is that a real phenomenon? Is that possible? And how do they get to that point? And do the states like allow that, knowing that this would cause the future problems for them?
So it's difficult for me to answer that question because I'm not a regulator of these companies, right? But when I see big companies and small companies in countries, I see a very different regulatory regime. The big companies somehow are able to get through stuff faster because they're too big to fail, right? They generate too many jobs, they generate too much sort of like public opinion, and therefore they're easy to sort of like let keep going. And if you read a lot of the press that's coming out on Boeing, right? You essentially there's a lot of sort of concerns about safety and all of that stuff, right? And at the end of it, when you read the FAA's own assessment, they said they allowed the company to regulate a lot of what it should have regulated, right? This is not me talking. This is actually the FAA talking, right? They're their own sort of regulator. And that's what happens. When you're too big, start getting benefit of the doubt. And then at some point, you become too big to fail. And then you get too big to regulate, and a small company in that country will get the full brunt of the regulator, while the big companies will be let off because they're too big to fail. And that's unfortunately the way the system has come to. But this is obviously not an equilibrium. And that's where you see a move towards better regulation. I think the EU has come up with a law on data protection, data privacy, onshoring, and everything like that. So action and reaction happen, but with a lag. Um, yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost they like too big to handle, basically. The organizations that the truth of that sort of it has to be allowed to get to that particular stage. Just lastly, so, I'm conscious like we're taking like quite a lot of your time as well. Going back to our organization, Arbaeen, sort of global network, and you had the opportunity to travel and attend the networking event, and also experience the energy in that city as well. Our platform it is still in we say like early stages, but we're desperately trying to bring like people together to exchange ideas, use each other's like expertise, develop those best practice models. What would be your advice to our organization in terms of progress and how we can make ourselves more useful?
So I think carry on, right? And that's the first thing. The second thing is that the ideas that were discussed around a university At the meeting, Allama Saab said that he would like to make the best university in the world, and essentially just make sure that do that. Just take one project, take it till the end, right, and showcase it. And I think at the Arbaeen event, you will get a lot of people who will come behind you and then take them together. So I think these conversations that you continue are great. And then even continue conversations on essentially the project, like the university, because at the time, and at the Arbaeen event, somebody mentioned that the Aga Khan University is well known for essentially great doctors, and it's like, big, the brand name is really good. We don't have anything, even though we have the most knowledge that our imams have essentially given us, but we don't implement them. So I think it's a great platform, number one. Number two is carry on and keep building on it. And the third is take one or two projects and take them to the nth implementation. That's so once you have proof of concept, you are going to do a lot more and a lot bigger things.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for that. That's a very practical sort of advice. We're just coming to the end of our time, and I'd like to thank Brother Shabih Ali Mohib once again, and just a reminder for all our viewers that we have the platform is online at arbaeenglobal.net. If you can register over there as an individual or as an organization, and there'll be a chance to connect to other individuals and organizations around the world as well. All the details of our previous events are online too, which would be accessible once you sign up as a member. And with your support, only like we can make this platform better for everyone to use. It's all of ours, like platform, rather than just a small sort of number of people. So we thank Shabi again, and we'll end with a prayer to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala to please hasten the reappearance of the 12th Imam, so that we can all be united and bring this world out of oppression, inshallah. So thank you
Mm.
again.
Thank you. Take care, Ali. Thanks so much.